In the news tonight, His Majesty describes the situation in Syria as the worst, most tragic humanitarian crisis of our time and says the Donors Conference is a test of leaders' resolve and ability to act. The London Donors Conference is hailed by leaders as an unprecedented success as it wraps up with $11 billion raised in pledges over the next years. And an Israeli court jails two Jewish youths, one for life and the other for 21 years for the murder of a Palestinian teenager in Jerusalem in 2014. Good evening and welcome to the News at 10. As the Syrian conflict enters its sixth year, His Majesty King Abdullah told a donors conference in London that traditional approaches to handling the crisis do not work to meet the worst or the most serious challenges, proposing instead a holistic approach of investment and growth to ensure sustainable solutions. The one-day conference dubbed Supporting Syria and the Region was organized by the United Kingdom, Norway, Kuwait and the United Nations. His Majesty said it was a test of leaders' resolve and ability to act. Here's the full 7-minute speech.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Prime Minister Cameron, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, Chancellor Merkel, Prime Minister Solberg, Secretary General. I'd like to thank the United Kingdom and its co-hosts, Kuwait, Germany, Norway, and of course the United Nations for spearheading this vital effort. Although we meet today under the banner of Supporting Syria and the Region Conference, I believe that this gathering is about so much more than quantifying our willingness to give. Indeed, at this critical moment in history, when we are confronted with what is arguably the worst, most tragic humanitarian crisis of our time, this gathering is a crucial test of our resolve, resilience, resourcefulness, and ability to act. The Syrian conflict is entering its sixth brutal year. Its bloodshed and human suffering have continued unabated. The repercussions have been global. The crisis has challenged economic and political alliances, raised questions about existing structures of cooperation, and strained the social values that keep humanity united. My friends, traditional approaches to handling crises simply do not work to meet this most serious of challenges. We need broader and bolder action. Today, Jordan and its global partners are proposing a new approach, one that meets this protracted crisis with a sustainable solution. Our holistic approach talks of investment and growth, not just aid and relief. It prioritizes empowerment and self-sufficiency for refugees over a demeaning resilience or reliance on handouts. It brings us together as partners, countries, regions, the private sector, international financial institutions, to build a new model for effective, sustainable action. Out of all the countries in the world that need help, why give special attention to Jordan? Because Jordan is not a poor country that takes, it is a country that gives and gives abundantly. Imagine the impact had Jordan been different, had we not let in refugees into our country over the past decades. What would the impact on the region and world peace and security have been now? Today, 1 of every 5 people living in our kingdom is a Syrian refugee. It is as if the UK had absorbed the entire population of Belgium. Hosting Syrian refugees consumes more than 1/4 of Jordan's national budget. The US and the EU, whose combined economies are almost 1,000 times bigger than Jordan, are struggling to handle about 1 million refugees. Our small country alone has taken in almost 1.3 million already. And this is in addition to all the others whom Jordan shelters, from the Gulf Wars, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Libya, Yemen, as well as Christian minorities fleeing persecution. Jordan was hit with the first wave of Syrian refugees soon after the devastating impacts of global financial crises and the turmoil of the region's Arab Spring. In challenging times, our country did the right thing, as it has so often before. Our generosity is driven by Jordanian values and sustained by the national resilience that has kept our country secure. And this resilience is what has enabled Jordan to respond when we saw our neighbors in need and answer the call of the international community. Jordan has joined nations much larger and richer than we are in global peacekeeping and humanitarian missions. And I would wager that no other developing nation has contributed more to global security than Jordan. Our fight against terrorism began way before September 11th and continues vigorously today. Our contribution and adherence to peace and moderation have been steadfast and unwavering. Our determination to continue our economic and political reforms at home is equally strong. We are firm believers in the importance of strengthening and expanding our private sector. By supporting entrepreneurship and investment, we will be able to unlock a future of opportunity for our population. We are not perfect and do not claim to be, but we are doing our best against very difficult odds. Yet looking into the eyes of my people and seeing the hardship and distress they carry, I must tell you, we have reached our limit. I represent the people of Jordan. Their well-being and safety are my first priority. Our country will continue to do what we can do to help those in need, but it cannot be at the expense of our own people's welfare. As my friend President Clinton said, Jordan should not be penalized for doing the right thing. Now is the time for the world to make a meaningful stand on Jordan. Not just enough aid to keep our head barely above water. By partnering with Jordan and supporting our refugee response, you will not only be addressing the urgent needs of millions, you will be helping my country continue to do the right thing, fulfilling a critical role in our region and staying strong for the world. This is an investment in hope creation in an area where hope has been in limited supply. This is where we can take a political stance for the stability of the region and show our will and ability to act as one. Thank you very much.
On the sidelines of the Donors Conference for Syria, His Majesty King Abdullah met with British Prime Minister David Cameron to discuss the Syria crisis and regional developments. His Majesty highlighted the pressing need of supporting Jordan as host country of over 1.3 million Syrian refugees and to empower local communities in order to sustain assistance to the Syrians. He said assistance to Jordan would contribute to developing infrastructure, health, education, water and energy projects to ensure work opportunities for Jordanians in host communities as well as to Syrians. Again, King Abdullah reiterated the need to push for a political solution in Syria to end the suffering of the people. His Majesty's talks with Cameron also focused on countering terrorism and ending the threat on global security and stability through a holistic approach. Cameron pledged his country's willingness to stand by Jordan during these difficult times, saying the Donors Conference serves as a good opportunity to channel aid to the kingdom. Separately in London, King Abdullah met with Lebanese Prime Minister Tamam Salam and discussed with him ongoing developments in the region. The meeting focused on the outcome of the London conference and the need for support to Syria's neighbors to help communities cope with the influx of refugees. The Syria Donors Conference wrapped up with the leaders hailing it a success. British Prime Minister David Cameron announced that $6 billion have been raised for 2016, with a further $5 billion until 2020.
Today has been and is a day of hope, a day about saving lives, a day about building futures, a day about giving people the chance of a future, the chance of a life.
Never has the international community raised so much money on a single day for a single crisis.
At a Paris briefing attended by chairs of the conference, Foreign Minister Nasser Judeh described the meeting as a political conference par excellence. He said today was very important, not only in terms of the pledges made, but also as an investment in the security and stability of the region, and consequently the security of Europe and many other countries.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no humanitarian solution to the crisis in Syria. There's a political solution that will end humanitarian suffering. There's a political solution that will help us all fight extremism and terrorism, which is, again, a global threat.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, for his part, reminded the conference that while the situation of refugees is bad, that of the Syrians trapped inside the country enduring bombardments, sieges, and in some places, starvation is far worse. Referring to UN's Resolution 2054, Kerry said all parties have to allow humanitarian agencies access throughout the country, and particularly to people in need in besieged cities. So far, 6 million people have been displaced within Syria, and there are more than 4 million refugees in other countries.
Obviously, if people are reduced to eating grass and leaves and killing stray animals in order to survive on a day-to-day basis, that is something that should tear at the conscience of all civilized people, and we all have a responsibility to respond to it. So this morning I talked to Foreign Minister Lavrov, and we have agreed that we are engaged in a discussion about how to implement a ceasefire specifically, as well as some immediate possible confidence-building steps to deliver humanitarian assistance in keeping with the UN resolution.
In addition to pledging 2.3 billion euros in aid to Syria by 2018, including 1.1 billion euros this year alone, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the European Union will do whatever it can to improve export conditions for the countries bearing the brunt of Syria's refugee crisis, including possible trade preferences. Merkel said 1/4 of the amount should go to the World Food Programme.
Of this, we would like to dedicate 570 million euros to the World Food Programme as a contribution to the fact that 50% of their obligations concern those three countries, Lebanon, Turkey and Jordan, and that hopefully by the end of this day we can say that we do not have to worry anymore about food rations.
Since the start of Syria crisis, more than 1/4 of Syrian schools have been damaged, destroyed or used as shelters or for other purposes than education. According to UN reports, Syrian schools have been attacked more than 4,000 times in 4 years. Between 2011 and the end of 2014, the UN Secretary General reported more than 8,000 attacks on schools in 25 countries. 52% of those attacks have taken place in Syria. A young Syrian school student was invited to address the conference. She spoke on behalf of over 2 million students deprived of education due to the crisis. Here's more.
Between 2.1 and 2.4 million Syrian children have lost their right to education and are now unable to attend school due to the crisis. In the chaos of carnage, starvation and evacuation, the children tell sobering stories amid the ongoing military conflict in Syria. Schools inside Syria have been bombed, destroyed, commandeered by armed groups, or turned into weapons caches or torture centers. Nobel Prize winner Malala was in London for the Syria Donors Conference to appeal for money for education, and today she introduced her friend Syrian refugee Muzul Mhelan to world leaders. The Pakistani schoolgirl who was shot in the head by the Taliban and brought to Britain for life-saving treatment told the conference that 17-year-old refugee Muzun was her inspiration.
At this summit, many people will talk about the 1.4 million children who are out of school in Syria who have become refugees. And it is important that we hear from these children, from these young people of Syria in their own words. Muzun is my role model as well because of the commitment that she has, because of the strength that she has to fight for education. And I'm hopeful that she will inspire you all as well.
Muzun's family are from Dir'a, and they have been granted asylum in Britain after seeking refuge at Jordan's Saatri camp. She is now an education advocate and was the only young Syrian to speak at the conference.
What all refugees want is for life to be normal. I hope after this conference, more refugees will be able to have a normal life, especially the children. We need education because Syria needs us. Syria needs engineers and teachers and doctors and journalists. Without us, who will bring peace?
The Malala reports that donor funding to education as a percentage of total humanitarian assistance to Syria is very low. It says only Norway, Kuwait and the EU have given more than 2% of the aid for education. Hibal Atoum for the news at 10.
On the ground in Syria, meanwhile, and according to Syrian army officials, rebels in Aleppo will soon be completely encircled as the army entered the Nubal and Al-Zahra towns northwest of the city. Soldiers and residents celebrated the army advance in the two Shiite towns. The army and allied militia, backed by Russian airstrikes, broke through rebel lines yesterday to the towns as the military continued operations near Aleppo. Aleppo, 50 kilometers south of the Turkish border, was Syria's most populous city before the country's descent into civil war. It has been partitioned into zones of government and insurgent control since 2020. And here at home, the border guards have ushered an additional 180 Syrian refugees during the past 48 hours, including men and women of different ages. Border guard personnel and Royal Medical Services staff provided the Syrian newcomers with the necessary provisions as well as medical attention before they were escorted to their respective shelters and camps. Over to Iraq, where Iraqi forces say they have cleared 50% of Daesh terrorist control from the Sijara district of Ramadi as they push through the city surrounding areas. Backed by air support from the US-led international coalition and Iraq's Air Force, counter-terrorism troops advanced towards the center of the district. Military sources said the counter-terrorism forces have also attacked positions east of the city. A senior military official said Iraqi forces killed more than 37 terrorists and destroyed 2 car bombs in addition to removing 225 booby traps. The government said Ramadi would be handed over to the local police and to a Sunni tribal force once it was secured. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met with the heads and members of the Jordanian-Turkish Business Council to discuss joint cooperation and trade exchange between the two countries. Mansour told the council, comprising the Jordanian Businessmen Association and the Turkish Economic and Foreign Relations Council, that bilateral trade exchange has been adversely affected due to the Syria crisis, but more so on the Jordanian side. While Jordan's exports to Turkey are transported by land, the kingdom's imports from Turkey are shipped by air and sea and have been less affected. Mansour also said he looked forward to a visit by Turkish Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoglu to Jordan to discuss furthering Jordanian-Turkish ties as well as cooperation on regional issues. Separately, the Prime Minister chaired a meeting of the Smart ID Card Project Steering Committee. The Smart Card is a project underway aiming to issue Jordanians a highly secured card that could be used as an ID card and a driver's license, as well as for purposes such as medical insurance and social security. Expected to be launched by the end of August this year, about 23% of the project is now completed and would serve 5 million people in the first stage. An Israeli court jailed 2 Jewish youths, one for life and the other for 21 years, for the murder of a Palestinian teenager in Jerusalem. It was the crime that helped trigger the 2014 Gaza war. The youth and a man who organized the murder were found guilty in November of the abduction, bludgeoning, strangling and burning of 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Khdair on July 2, 2014. All of them had confessed and said the murder was revenge for the killing of 3 Israeli youths by Hamas in the occupied West Bank. Abu Khdair's father, Hussein, told reporters at Jerusalem District Court that the family wanted an appeal to the Supreme Court to give the youngest defendant a life prison term as well. The man who organized Abu Khdair's murder lodged an insanity plea that has held up his former conviction and sentencing. A court review of his psychological competence is scheduled for next week. The prosecutor said it was too early to know whether the state would appeal the lesser sentence of the younger teen, but that the hopes the insanity plea would be quashed and the man would be jailed for life. Brazil and the United States are working together to develop a vaccine for the Zika virus. But according to Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff, it might take some time before the vaccine is ready. A number of drug developers and universities are attempting to produce the vaccine, but experts have said that a result is months or even years away. In Panama, meanwhile, researchers developed a possible strategy to combat the spread of the Zika through the release of sterile male mosquitoes to combat population numbers of the virus-carrying insect. And in the United States, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health held a news conference during which officials named objectives that the country should adopt precautionary measures against the virus.
We can see that with aggressive efforts to try to control the virus and to control the vector in other locations, it is continuing to spread. So I think our focus needs to be on, number one, protecting individuals by advising them when they go to locations where the virus is present, how to avoid getting infected, and then to take aggressive measures here in our own county to eliminate the breeding sites so that we can prevent it from becoming established. Both of those objectives are achievable.
An exceptional Ferrari racing car is up for the grabs at a Paris auction and could go for a record price of up to 32 million euros. The instantly recognizable red Ferrari was on display at the Paris Retromobile Fair before it goes on sale at an art cural auction on tomorrow evening. The 1957 Ferrari, one of only 4 ever to come out of the Ferrari factory, allowed the Italian manufacturer to win the construction's World Championship title in 1957 and saw the most famous drivers of the time race at its wheel. The last record was for another Ferrari, a 250 GTO, which went for 28.5 million euros in 2014. A British runner won the first edition of the Genghis Khan Ice Marathon, braving wolves and temperatures as low as -35°C in a remote part of Mongolia. The race was staged in breathtaking scenery in the Tulgol River area, a region so heavily populated with wolves, and only 9 runners took part, although some support runners joined in for part of the distance. British doctor Andrew Murray took the honours in a time of 3 hours, 7 minutes of the with Douglas Wilson of Australia taking second place 35 minutes behind, with another Briton, Paul Dunstan, third in 4 hours and 12 minutes. And finally, to the weather outlook, it continues to be cold in most regions for the rest of tonight, with possible frosty conditions in the late hours over the high mountainous regions. Tomorrow it will be relatively warm and sunny skies as a rise in temperatures is expected or forecasted, with a high of 20 degrees Celsius expected in Amman. Winds will be southeasterly moderate to fresh, stirring dust in the Badia regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect fair weather tomorrow, with southerly moderate winds and slightly high seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close here, our top stories once again. His Majesty describes the situation in Syria as the worst, most tragic humanitarian crisis of our time, and says the Donors Conference is a test of leaders' resolve and ability to act. The London Donors Conference is hailed by leaders as an unprecedented success, as it thrives up with $11 billion raised in pledges over the next years. And an Israeli court jails 2 Jewish youths, one for life and the other for 21 years, for the murder of a Palestinian teenager in Jerusalem in 2014. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Leo Baltar. Thank you for watching and have a good night.